Welcome back to this third segment. Here we are with Brad Feld. So in this segment, lightning round, ideally it's either or. You can't really answer it depends, but again, nobody's going to cry if you decide to even expand. So let's start off. What's more important, idea or entrepreneur?
Entrepreneur.
What's more important, idea or execution?
Execution.
What's more important, execution or entrepreneur?
Neither.
Okay.
Because they're not separable.
Okay, interesting. So to you, even if you have an entrepreneur who's like a big idea guy, you expect him to be the execution
No.
guy?
I think in the context of the company.
Okay, fair enough. What's more important, timing or luck?
Neither.
Okay. Is there one thing that you think is more important?
You can't control either of them.
You can't control.
They're non-controllable. So I think the only things that you can put importance on are things that you can control.
Okay.
Luck, by the way, luck is great, and awesome timing is great. But as an entrepreneur, you can't control either of them.
Fair enough. Okay, I see your perspective. So what is more important? We hear content is king, but nowadays the companies that have the most amount of value, it's the distribution companies. What's more important, content or distribution?
It changes over time, and it depends on what you're dealing with.
Today, right now?
It depends on the segment you're in. And in fact, it's very interesting. Many of the distribution dynamics change very rapidly. And one of the reasons there's so many challenges that existing incumbent content providers have, and why there's such messed up intellectual property dynamics around content, is because you have incumbents trying to prevent new distribution dynamics from appearing in the market. You have other situations where the distribution dynamics are untenable in the context of the content being created. And so this dislocation will continue to change. I believe that when we get teleportation machines and we can teleport us to Europe in 5 minutes, distribution changes again, right? So I think it's very hard to take the two apart.
Fair enough. I'd like to have a recorded conversation with you and Elon Musk there. Okay, what's more important, data or distribution?
Never thought about it. I think data is more important.
Okay, and what's more important, data or content?
Oh, I think data is way more important than.
Okay, so speaking on data, let's just double click there and expand. Is the fact that big data is so hot now, has it always been hot, or is it that the technology and the data capturing's changed, or is it just a recent phenomenon, and if so, why?
Yeah, I was the keynote at a conference last week that was a big data conference in Boston, and my headline sentence, I started my talk off first thing in the morning by saying big data is bullshit. And the thing that we call big data today will be microscopic data in 20 years. And so the idea that there's this special thing happening that's unique, it's just the label of the day. It's always been a phenomena of trying to deal with this data. And the interesting thing is you get new vectors, right? 10 years ago, we didn't have real-time geolocation in our data, right? We didn't have chocolate in our peanut butter. And now we have chocolate in our peanut butter, and there's a whole different set of things you have to do. We didn't have the ability from a compute perspective to process a bunch of this stuff in real time. And now we have the ability to process a bunch of stuff in real time. Those two things are intrinsically linked. I mean, it's interesting, the dichotomies of many of these questions, which is more important. I guess I don't care. If I had a sort of a wrap-up question across all of this is, do you actually care about the answer to any of those questions? Like, no, I don't actually care if I'm right or wrong. Because I think all of the individual components are important. And in the context of data, when I answer data versus content, I actually view it much, much harder to understand what's happening than it is to do something that people respond positively to. So for example, I'll use Cheeseburger as a fun example that Ben Ha, who's the CEO of Cheeseburger, believes that humans already know what's funny and that we don't need to manufacture funny, that what we need to do is surface it and then we can add to it. Now you can say that's cute for cat pictures, but that can't make full-length movies. And the answer is, why not? Right? And, having somebody who, just wrote a couple of books, is there a difference between a long-form book and a blog post and a video? Absolutely. Right? Which is more important, the content that I created there or the distribution? Well, let's see. The content's actually quite important because unless the content makes any sense, nobody gives a shit. The distribution actually matters, but maybe not the distribution as exists today. The physical book distribution doesn't matter. I'm not even clear that the distribution of the virtual book or the digital book matters. The distribution of the ideas matter. And so how do you distribute those ideas? And you can't distribute those ideas 200 pages at a time, right? So how do you deal with that in the context of this rapidly evolving world?
You touched.
How was that? I
that was
totally
good.
obfuscated the
But that's
lightning
fine.
round,
Forget
but
I was going to say it's a good excuse.
It's now the thunderstorm round.
It's fine. Yeah, this is the sandy storm. No, but you touched on something, so we're going to go on a total tangent here. You talked about Ben, who I met a couple times, once in New York. He's Seattle entrepreneur, Cheeseburger Network. So maybe 6 to 18 months, he started to get more and more in the press. In a good way, but also less good ways. But my point is he was under the limelight. Today, you see BuzzFeed in the news for a lot of the same reasons, like trying to capture what's viral and all that. So my point is, I hope they both do kick-ass exits, everybody's happy. But you, as an investor in Ben's company, when you see another, you're not an investor in BuzzFeed, okay. So when you see another company that's more or less trying to have the same message, what's your reaction? Do you take that email, do you take that article about BuzzFeed being the latest thing since sliced bread? Do you send it to Ben, or do you send it to a couple of guys on his team? Do you send it to members of the board if you're on the board and you're like, hey guys, these guys, like, take me through that, you know.
So for starters, most of those situations, you know, somebody like Ben knows all of his competitors and other things that are happening that are interesting but before I do. And if I see them, they're mostly just, here's some data. I actually don't personally worry that much about the competitive dynamics in a rapidly emerging segment. I believe very strongly you should study your competitors closely and understand what they're doing, and then concentrate on doing what you do that's unique and special. And we're fortunate in that many of the companies we invest in are, you know, the leaders in their market or the number 2 in their market, and those are both, you know, the classic GE be number 1 or be number 2 in your market. As a venture investor, I'm okay with either of those positions. They require different strategies. And when you look at the competitive dynamics, I like to say, be obsessed about your competitors while not worrying about them at all. Okay. Like, know what they're doing, but stay focused on what you're trying to achieve. And if what you're trying to achieve doesn't make sense at some point, change it. But don't let it be influenced by whatever latest thing that somebody wrote about. And be data-driven. Okay, it's nice that everybody's talking about them, but does it actually have any impact on what's happening to you? And is it actually the same thing you're doing, or is it just a lightweight copy of what you're doing? And if it's a lightweight copy of what you're doing, what are you doing that's different and defensible? Okay,
good stuff. A couple more questions, and then you're off. So would you say that early stage investing or VC, whatever VCs usually invest in, or even late stage, are any of those or all of those or none of those like leading indicators of what's becoming hot? Or is it trailing indicators in that it's already been hot, it's grown, and the money comes after it?
I think it varies by investor. I think a mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make is looking at VCs as a single archetype. Yeah. You know, I don't know whether there's 10 or 20 or 50 archetypes, but it's like Dungeons and Dragons, which is what I played when I was a kid, or Magic the Gathering, or, there's just a lot of different archetypes. And to say all VCs fit in the same archetype and therefore is an error. An early stage investor that has very, very deep knowledge in an area can be a very powerful leading indicator. That person can also completely miss the boat, right? So just because they're an early stage investor doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a leading indicator. And the same is true the other direction, right? The later stage investor that is investing in things in a significant way, but before anybody really recognizes that that category is taking off, actually might be a good leading indicator. There are also very obvious lagging indicator characteristics, right? The 17th thing that gets funded that looks like Cheeseburger, for example. Okay, got it, right? And so, but that's already, that ship has sailed. And then you have to ask the interesting question is what Cheeseburger's mission still compelling and relevant? And a company that never refreshes what it's trying to get at based on the dynamics of how the market unfolds is probably not one that's going to be successful.
Good stuff. Last question. Are you expecting a big shakeout amongst all the incubators that have popped up around the country and, in fact, around the world?
So separate incubators from accelerators, because I really use the words deliberately different.
So expand what is what in your...
Well, for me, an accelerator is a program like Techstars that gives somebody money, gives a company money, relatively small amount of money in exchange for some equity in the company, puts them through a 90-day program. The style that is the Techstars style is a very heavy mentor-driven program. You're surrounded by 50 to 100 mentors for the program in whatever the geography it is. And that 90-day cycle At the end, and by the way, in Techstars, there's a belief that you have to be co-located. So there's a lot of value in having everybody in the same physical space for a variety of reasons. And at the end of it, the companies are launched. And they might be launched during the program. Some of them are launched before they come in the program, but there's another level of launch that happens at the end of the program. An incubator is physical space that the current best example of incubators are co-working spaces. They're places where people can congregate in one place, and they typically pay rent, and sometimes there's some other economic dynamics associated with it, but it's a way to concentrate entrepreneurial energy. But there's no duration dynamic usually in an incubator. You stay for however long you want to pay rent. There is no structure around it that's formalized. The structure is very ad hoc. In some cases there are programmatic activities, but it's not the same as accelerator. I think co-working spaces are good. I'm a big believer in this notion of entrepreneurial density in the book Before Startup Life, Startup Communities, which is the one that we're talking about here today. I talk about this idea of entrepreneurial density and really concentrating the entrepreneurs in a relatively tight geography, which in Boulder, for example, is like 5 blocks by 10 blocks in downtown Boulder. In New York, Union Square is a great place of entrepreneurial density. So I think that they're useful, but I think accelerators are magical. Accelerators are something that essentially become education for entrepreneurs. They're a graduate school-like phenomena that happens in a very concentrated period of time that not just gives them access to a little bit of capital and mentors, but wires them together in a very substantive way, puts incredible pressure on the team to execute a lot over a short period of time, gets them connected into the community in a much more credible way. The question of will there be a shakeout? Of course there will be some that succeed and fail. I actually don't know on a macro basis what the arc is. I think the hardest point for an accelerator is the self-sustainable part of it. The first year is really easy. Everybody's excited. There's a new accelerator. Boom. The second year, usually relatively easy still. The third year, people realize, oh, this is hard. Like, there's not quick exits. Like, it's more capital going in. And the people running the accelerator realize, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. Yeah. And the community, if the community hasn't rallied around the accelerator, or if there's not other stuff, all of a sudden it starts to feel a little lonely. So I think that there's definitely lots of examples of accelerators that'll go through a 2 or 3 or 4 year arc. But I don't think we're anywhere close to saturation in terms of this dynamic. And I think it's a model which will continue to evolve at Techstars, but I think has durability for a very long time.
Good stuff. That was Brad Feld with us on this installment of HipMojo. See you next time.